I kind of had problems or issues that I felt if I bought something that would be the solution. And I felt like this is really odd. How can both these things be true at once? I've got way too much stuff, but yet I still feel like I have to be buying all the time. And it also related back to this idea that I felt I could never make the right choice with consumption, that whichever choice I made was kind of affecting some person or the environment badly. So I decided to just try stop shopping for a year and see what happened and what I could learn from it. And it was a fantastically informative year.
Hej och välkomna till podden Forskarmötet. Idag har jag tagit mig till Lund och jag sitter i en studio på Ekonomihögskolan. Och det gör jag för att jag ska ha ett snack med Carys Egan-Wyer. Hej Carys!
Hej!
Och lite kort bara, du är ju forskare vid Lunds universitet sedan flera år. Och sedan 2019 så ansvarar du för ett forskningstema som heter framtidens konsumtion. Och det sker inom ramen för Centrum för handelsforskning. Och du har ju varit aktuell med forskningsfinansierade medel från Handelsrådet i flera omgångar. Och just nu är du med i en forskargrupp som tittar extra på det här med nya butiksformat, eller hur? Berätta lite grann, vad handlar det här om?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting project about different kinds of physical store formats that we see emerging and hopefully going to continue seeing emerge in the future. So I always give the example for people who want to picture what I'm talking about when I say new store formats. I give the example of IKEA's kind of city stores that are really small, kind of miniature versions of their warehouses which are in cities, or maybe they're planning studios where you can go and plan your kitchen or your bedroom storage, that kind of thing. And they can be lots of different types of things. It could include pop-up stores or unmanned stores, anything really that's a different format from what we normally see from that retailer. And we start to see a lot of those as physical stores are trying to compete with online stores and offer customers something more interesting, some reason to go to the physical store.
För tidigare när man har mätt hur går det för en retailer så har man ju kanske tittat på antalet kvadratmeter och hur mycket var försäljningen den här veckan och den här månaden. Och det blir ju knepigt om man har så många olika kanaler där köparen hoppar först från det ena sen till det andra och så vet man inte riktigt var sker försäljningen.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of these kind of new store formats, they don't even sell anything at all. They might be showrooms, they might be, like I mentioned before, planning studios or different ways to interact with the consumers that kind of build a retailer's brand or add value for the customer in new ways, but it's not necessarily that they buy things there and then in the store. So it's really important, I think, for us as researchers and for retail managers to understand what does the journey look like, what the customer journey look like for individual customers in this kind of new landscape. How do they use these formats? What are they doing there? And what do they do before and afterwards? How do they get there and what do they kind of perhaps order online afterwards, or what changes about their intentions to shop after they've had an interaction with this kind of store format? And IKEA is quite a good example again because they really test out a lot of these new formats. So they just try. And then it's really important to be able to know what is the results of that trial. Is this contributing something? And if you can't just measure how much does it sell, you have to be a little bit creative, and we have to figure out how can we evaluate these stores? What can we say about them? Is it worth us doing it in the future? And what happens if we take them away? What's going to happen to kind of the customer journey then? How will that impact our bottom line? And also, I think even if you do own everything in your kind of value chain there, and you can eventually see whether your sales go up and down on a kind of global or national scale. There's still a lot of times in retail that certain sales belong to certain regional areas, right? So if, we measure sales and reward people who work within certain geographical regions. So it's also important to know that if you build one of these new store formats in a particular geographical area, and then those sales kind of reappear somewhere else in another geographical area or online, that retailers have some way of kind of understanding what's happening there as well, I think.
Tittar ni på IKEA Sverige, Norden just, eller tittar ni utanför gränserna?
We have a lot of research going on in the UK as well, and I think we have done some in Spain, but mostly at the moment UK and Sweden.
Hur mycket öppnar IKEA upp? Alltså hur mycket får ni komma bakom kulisserna här?
Yeah, IKEA are really, really open with this. I think they want to know more about this as well. So yeah, it's been a really good partnership there. We've been in the stores getting data from customers that are there. But we are kind of also looking more broadly at other kind of new store formats. It's not only IKEA that we're studying there. So we're trying to understand how do these various kinds of store formats play a part in the customer journeys for lots of different customers and lots of different retail.
Jag tittar på projektet, den har sagt kring projektet i början här, så sa ni också på att ni hoppas på att kunna använda Google på olika sätt. Kan du förklara lite kring det?
Yeah, the idea there is that I don't know how technical the listeners are here, but oftentimes when you go into a store, your mobile phone knows about it, knows where you are and what you're doing. And so if you then leave that store and go to a website and buy something, that's a fantastic way for us as researchers or as retail managers to know that kind of visit to the store has had an impact on your shopping, your customer journey. So it would be really great to kind of measure that and to kind of get some access to that data on what do people do with their phones in the store and when they leave the store. But as far as I know, at the moment we haven't quite got all that data and we need a little bit more expertise there.
Och nu hörde jag vad folk gör med sin telefon med i butiken, och då det lät ju mer än att man ser hur många inpasseringar det är med ett mobilabonnemang.
Yeah.
Det lät som man går ganska mycket på individnivå. Jag vet att det har ju varit kring cityutvecklare till centrumutvecklare har ju velat mäta till exempel hur folk rör sig på torg och gator och sådär, och det har blivit lite diskussion kring det. Men hur långt har ni kommit i diskussionerna kring det här?
Yeah, not as far as we would have liked actually. And I think for lots of the reasons you describe, this is still a little bit of a problematic area when it comes to privacy and how much we can see. And there's of course ways to disaggregate that data so it's no longer related to individuals. But as I said, I'm not really an expert on that, so I can't say much more, but it's something we are really interested in working with.
För den som blir nyfiken på outcome utav det här, när ungefär hoppas ni och tror att den här rapporten ska kunna finnas och läsa i sitt populärvetenskapliga format?
Yeah, I think towards the end of this year, towards the end of 2023, we'll have a report out.
Ja, vad härligt. Jag vet att ditt hjärta klappar extra hårt för hållbarhet. Och det är ju någonting som du också har i föreläsningarna för dina studenter. Och jag vet att när vi pratade förut här så borrade jag lite grann i det här. Men hållbarhet, vad är det egentligen? Hur delar man upp det? Ja, du sa sustainability, det är det här övergripande begreppet. 3 pelare, social, ekonomisk och det som vi på svenska kallar miljö, environmental. Och jag bara citerar dig här, för då sa du, jag talar gärna lite mindre om den här ekonomiska hållbarheten, för det är samhället ganska bra på redan.
Yeah.
Vilken del pratar du helst om och forskar kring?
Yeah, mostly environmental and social, but with a little greater emphasis on the environmental, I think, in my research. I'm very interested in overconsumption and how that infects the environment. And then
you said infects the environment, not affects.
Both are correct, I would say.
För att det som du doktorerade på, det handlade ju om konsumtion och hur man bygger sin identitet, eller hur?
Exactly.
Det var ju ett mycket speciellt projekt kring idrott.
Yeah,
Berätta för
exactly.
lyssnarna.
It's something that people usually get really excited about when I tell them, because everyone has a kind of opinion or some kind of relation to this hobby, which is long distance running, or this kind of extreme running sports like Tough Mudder and Toughest, and these kind of obstacle course races, or these very long ultra runs in the desert or in the mountains and so on. So I looked at people who consume those, and I took this kind of consumption perspective, because there's lots of other ways of understanding what people do when they are running these extreme distances. But I took a consumption perspective because I think what's really interesting about this running is that it's very often marketed and branded, and it takes place kind of publicly in these spectacles where people they run marathons and people stand on the sidelines and cheer, and they spend a lot of money to kind of do these activities. And that's the part of it that I think is really interesting.
För när man tänker på sportutövande så är det ju inte för gemene man konsumtion kanske man tänker på, utan att det här har en nästan halo om att det är någonting som är just very, very good.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that's really interesting, because when I spoke to people about their hobby or the way they consume their hobby, a lot of them talked first and foremost about this freedom and getting away from all the demands of society when they run. It was a space and a place where they could forget what they needed to do in their everyday lives and the demands that they saw from them there. But what was really interesting was when we dug deeper, when we talked for a longer time, often the kind of words that people used when they talked about consuming these kind of big running events was all not all, but very much of it was kind of economic-based language. They talked about investing time to get a good result when they run, and they could buy themselves time in the race by having the right equipment and the right kind of gear. And that I thought was a really interesting kind of tension, that on the one hand, they really believed they were getting away from all these demands of real life, and on the other hand, they were really submitting to kind of capitalist society by making this hobby that should be about freedom and getting away all about kind of competing and getting better and investing time to kind of perform. And that to me is very much what a lot of our kind of everyday capitalist lifestyle is about. But yet these kind of two things lived simultaneously in how they talked about running.
Vad skulle du säga att du har tagit med dig från det här projektet in i nästa forskning? Vad är liksom nyckelkänslan, nyckelfindings?
Good question. I think...
Du har börjat extremsport.
No, I haven't. I did actually take part in an ultra run during the research, just to kind of... Var någonstans? It was, I've forgotten the name of the place, up in mid-Sweden somewhere, Skövde. Skövde. But I didn't do the whole thing. I bowed out after about 20 kilometers, which was enough for me. And then happily I got pregnant and couldn't really run very much, so I couldn't do any more of that.
Okay. The best excuse.
Exactly. But no, the thing I would take with me, I think, from this research onwards to other research is this kind of idea that we kind of create very individual, responsibilized consumers in today's society. So when I looked at runners, it was very much for them, oftentimes, even if they didn't realize it, it was very much about creating a personal brand, proving that they were kind of good people who did good things, like you mentioned, that the sport has this kind of good vibe about it, that they were fit, kind of well-performing people. And I think that's something we see in lots of aspects of consumption, that we consume different things that show us to be good people, that it's part of kind of performing who we are.
Det är många aktörer i samhället som uppmanar konsumenten att genom aktiva val ta ställning och göra de rätta valen. Det kan vara för hushållsekonomin, det kan vara för samhället, det kan vara för den egna hälsan. Det kan vara för barnens bästa. Alltså listan är, eller för elkostnaden. Listan kan göras oändlig. Lägger vi för mycket ansvar på individen?
Yeah, for the short answer for me is yes, absolutely. And that's not to minimize this idea of consumer power. I think we do have a lot of power to make good choices, and through those choices to show retailers and producers and the state what kind of world we want to live in, absolutely. But I think we've seen in the last 40 or 50 years that we've really put so much emphasis on consumer power, especially when it comes to things like sustainability and environmental and social sustainability, that we expect consumers to make the right choices. And there's lots and lots of reasons why that doesn't work.
Kan du ge ett praktiskt exempel hur det skulle kunna se ut i vardagen för de som ska göra de här valen? Och då tänkte jag inte ens på hur man ska göra integritetsvalen och ställa in apparna i sin telefon.
So an example of how difficult it is to make the right choice. Yeah, my go-to is from an article I published with my colleague Jack Coffin from the University of Manchester, and that is about one of the first choices you make in the morning. You have your morning coffee and you decide what milk you're going to put in it. Now, we all know that cow milk is a pretty bad choice for the environment, so a lot of people might go instead to soya as a better choice. Then we find out a lot of information about how soya is being grown on land where it used to be rainforest. It's been destroying the rainforest. So perhaps we shouldn't drink soya. But then we find out that actually most of that soya that's been grown on the rainforest land actually goes to feed cows, which make milk. So we're back there again. So we can go, perhaps we should go for oats instead. That's an oat milk would be a good choice.
And then now you're already late for work.
Exactly. And I've got 4 more milks to go through here, So this is the first choice of the day that we're expecting consumers to do right with. And it demonstrates, I think, first of all, the overwhelming energy and time that's required for consumers to make the right choice, the kind of lack of transparency in supply chains and production that we expect consumers to understand, even when some retailers can't really understand the full supply chain impacts. Finally, there's a kind of financial cost also that we expect consumers to pay more for organic or environmentally friendly or fair trade and so on. And I think it's just too much to expect of a consumer who essentially can and will be overwhelmed by making these right choices. And I think especially when people try to do the right thing and make the right sustainability choices, and they subsequently find out it wasn't right, or it wasn't as good as they thought, like this example with the milk. I think people get extremely fatigued and they give up. And they think, whatever I do is wrong, so why bother?
Man kan faktiskt bli riktigt förbaskad ibland också. Och risken är ju då att man i alla fall för en kort tid struntar överhuvudtaget. Jag upplever att det finns ett litet blame game här nu på konsumenterna. Det är tuffa tider för många. Och nu passar det minsann att sluta köpa eko.
Yeah, and again, like with thinking about this kind of cost of living crisis, again, we see that consumers are kind of blamed here. And we see, people coming out and saying that consumers should stop buying expensive stuff and we should, force retailers to do better by buying cheap things. And again, I think it's putting everything on the consumer. You could very well say, it would be very unpopular, but you could theoretically say to retailers, well, you can't raise your prices anymore. That's where we kind of stop the inflationary cycle. But we don't. We put everything on consumers to stop spending, cut back, make good choices, buy eco, even if they can't afford it, and so on and so on. So I think, that was a very long answer to a question of, do we put too much pressure on consumers? Yes.
Och det är lätt att man halkar in på politik här. Och om man inte drar det så långt som till prisstopp, så om jag tolkar dig rätt här, så det som behövs, det är alltså en styrning från de folkvalda som gör det lättare att göra bra val, både för slutkonsumenter men också för företagen.
Yes.
Och också ett branschsamarbete kan man ju också tänka sig.
Yep, I think all of those things are good. I think ultimately to kind of level the playing field for retailers also, we should have more regulation around this. We can't expect retailers to make the right choices when it perhaps makes them less competitive.
To others, yeah.
Exactly. So, I'm a kind of strong believer that we need more top-down direction than we have had to kind of level the playing field for retailers and to make it easier for consumers to do the right thing.
Inte helt rätt med tanke på att just retail är ju en så stor, alltså det är ju en globala kedjor med väldigt mycket import, så att det är ju inte det att vi bara håller oss i Europa. Men prata om konsumentmakt här, du har ju då mer eller mindre aktivt idkat köpstopp här sedan flera år tillbaka. Det är ju också en sorts konsumentmakt, men det är kanske inte därför du egentligen började med det.
In some ways, it was to do with just what I've been talking about. This kind of year of no shopping coincided with the fact that I'd just moved house and had a small child, and I felt that in line with the moving house, I realized how much stuff I had first, but yet moving house and having a small child meant that I felt all the time like I needed to buy more things. I kind of had problems or issues that I felt if I bought something that would be the solution, and I felt like this is really odd. How can both these things be true at once? I've got way too much stuff, but yet I still feel like I have to be buying all the time. So, and it also related back to this idea that I felt I could never make the right choice with consumption, that whichever choice I made was kind of affecting some person or the environment badly. So I decided to just try stop shopping for a year and see what happened and what I could learn from it. And it was a fantastically informative year, I must say.
Så du har använt i din forskning sen och dina föreläsningar?
Yeah, absolutely.
Och det här var några år sedan. Hur ser det ut i familjen Egan-Wyer nu då?
Yeah, I would say that my 8-year-old son is not a big fan of stop shopping, but I still try to do the best I can. I still don't buy, or very rarely buy, new clothes. I buy mostly secondhand, wherever possible, and also with furniture, we mainly buy secondhand when we can. We used to do a lot of buying experiences instead of things for...
Men det är ju också konsumtion. Om sport och konsumtion är ju upplevelser också konsumtion om man tänker i de termerna.
Everything is consumption when you're a consumption researcher. No, but I had the feeling that buying experiences was... it was better for two reasons. One was that it uses less resources from the planet, creates less waste. And two, it kind of... directs your money more into your local economy than into long global supply chains.
För här för experience här, då är det inte resor till Karibien vi pratar om, utan det är alltså mer grilla korv i skogen och sådana saker.
Maybe go to the movies or have a nice restaurant visit. Yeah.
Vi måste ju också hinna med att prata om det här, alltså mode är ju intressant på många sätt och har blivit liksom den bransch man ofta talar om i de här sammanhangen, och där är ju det som är second hand, mycket låter bättre på engelska, andra hand, begagnat eller pre-loved. Så. Det finns ju många aktörer som håller på med det här, och det är också mycket som går privatperson till privatperson. Då finns det ju de som säger att det finns mycket fint mode att handla för inte så stora pengar. Men då kanske man överkonsumerar i alla fall. Vad skulle du säga till någon som säger det till dig i det här fallet?
I think it's a really interesting point actually. And I think before I answer that question, I would say that I think in some ways the fashion retail industry gets a bad rep because it's kind of it's at the forefront of all the critique around overconsumption. I guess because when you look at it, fashion per se, as opposed to clothing, fashion is totally unnecessary. Clothing, of course, we need, but we don't need to change that clothing every season or every year or whatever, as long as it still works. So fashion is an easy target. But I think there's lots of other industries that, that are just as bad as fashion and that don't get the kind of same recognition. So that's maybe worth saying to start with. But when it comes to consumption of secondhand fashion, absolutely, you can overconsume that for sure. And that's not unproblematic. I say this as a probable overconsumer of secondhand fashion. But I think, let's start with the good. The good is that you're not exploiting new resources for the main part when you buy secondhand clothes. So
no new fibers.
Exactly.
No new chemicals.
Exactly. So very little pollution as related to production of those clothes, which is great. And with that in mind, it's worth saying that a recent estimate says that we have about enough clothes already in existence for the next 6 generations of people. So it's hard to make a rational justification, at least for the fashion industry. But then when you come to the kind of maybe the bad of over-consuming secondhand, I guess we have to consider that a lot of times this clothing, if you make an order online, is delivered. It's sometimes often returned. So that, of course, has an environmental impact in terms of carbon emissions from transport and so on. So it's not totally unproblematic, but I would still say that even going totally wild and madly over-consuming pre-loved fashion is still better than being moderately wild and over-consuming new fashion. That's the way I see it, at least.
I den cirkularitet som eftersträvas, tror du att det är befintliga retailers som kommer att ta frontpinnen här, eller kommer det att vara helt nya aktörer som kommer att ta hand om nästa del av kedjan, till exempel med logistik, sorteringar och så vidare?
That's a good question. It's hard to look in the crystal ball, but I think what we see at the moment is that existing players are making small steps. They're making small changes and contributing here. And we see some innovative stuff there. But the big innovations, I think, that's really changing things so far are coming from new players. And a good example of this is this Siptex machine that we have in Malmö, which I can explain a little bit for those who don't know.
Please do.
Well, I don't have all the technical details, but I do my best. It's a big old machine that sorts clothes so that they can be recycled into new kind of and reused for making new clothes. So they're sorted by the kind of fiber that's in them. And that's something that has been really hard to do by hand because you can't always see or tell what different fibers are mixed together in clothes. So from a circular economy perspective, it's a fantastic development. It has the capacity, if I understand correctly, to basically sort all the waste textiles that Sweden produces today. It could do that no problem and create these kind of bundles of textiles that could be reused in a circular way. But what we see at the moment is that this financially and economically doesn't really work because before fibers can be kind of recycled and resorted, there's a manual step, which means they have to sort stuff that would be resold from stuff that is not good enough to resell and can be recycled. And at the moment, that is too expensive to do in Sweden. It's done overseas as an exported job. So then to get those clothes back to Malmö to be sorted in this beautiful Siptex machine is not financially viable. The fibers that are produced at the end will be too expensive for retailers to use or producers to use to make new clothes. So while we've got this kind of fantastic new players innovating and doing fantastic new things, I think we have to have support from both the kind of retail industry and the state to make these kind of innovations work, make them feasible within the current system. So the long answer again to your short question was that I think both. We're going to see new players coming with new innovations, but I think we're going to need to kind of make the system that already exists incorporate those in some way.
Everyone's talking AI now. Det här kanske kunde vara någonting för AI faktiskt, den här sorteringsfasen då.
Yeah, that is a great idea.
Mycket utav det här, just vi pratar fortfarande mode och kläder, second hand-marknaden sker ju privatperson till privatperson idag. Ett bra komplement, eller hur?
Yes.
Och det kommer väl alltid att fortsätta vara så också?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's great that people can sell and especially lend peer-to-peer. That's a fantastic market as well, so that we don't need to buy.
Det tar ju tid alltså. Då är det att man har det som en hobby.
Yeah, I think the selling, the lending works pretty well. That's pretty fast and easy. But the selling, yeah, it takes a long time both to find clothes that way and to sell clothes that way. And I think, yeah, it's a great complement. It's a great gateway drug, if you want to call it that, to secondhand shopping, secondhand clothes shopping. But I think we really want to see this scaled up, like certain platforms are doing, like Sellpy does a really good job of this, I think, of scaling up and making it much, much easier. It's still essentially peer-to-peer selling. It's people, you know, leaving in their clothes they don't want anymore and other people buying them. But Sellpy really takes care of all the stuff that happens in the middle and makes it extremely easy to do this, you know, peer-to-peer selling, which I think we need more of that. Anything that makes it easier for consumers to do the right thing is fantastic as far as I'm concerned.
Har du sett ett tecken på att det liksom i strävan efter att göra någonting bra och kanske också framstå som bra, att företag som går ut och säger vi tar tillbaka och sådär för att sälja vidare kanske faktiskt lägger osålda varor som aldrig har varit använda tidigare och säger titta på vårt fina second hand-utbud och det egentligen är en outlet. Finns det den risken, eller är det så här att ja, det är inte bra men det är ändå bättre att det blir sålt någon gång?
Yeah, I think this is a really tricky question, and I mean, the way that we've set up the whole kind of system, of course, retailers' jobs, first and foremost, is to make money, shareholder value. So they're always kind of driven in some way to do the best they can within those conditions, which might mean a little greenwashing, a little kind of making ourselves look better than we perhaps really are. And that's the same for all of us, the same for politicians, and it's the same for individuals, I think. We all want to kind of look the best that we can. So it's kind of, yeah, it's normal. But I think, yeah, you asked if it's in any case better that we sell that stuff. And I think, yeah, it is. Like, especially when it comes to online retail, it's so often that things you return that don't fit you when you've ordered them, for example, you think is going to be resold, but oftentimes it's not because the packaging's damaged or it's just too financially expensive to check that product and get it back into the kind of supply system.
Loop, yeah.
So if instead of being sent to, you know, waste in some other country or burnt or just, you know, disposed of, if that's sold at a slightly cheaper price on a secondhand website, great. I'm for it.
Nu ska jag försöka mig på någonting så får du kommentera efteråt då. Att om vi liksom ska wrap up det här och inte lämna de handlare som lyssnar med extremt dåligt samvete. Nej, men jag ska säga upp all min personal och sen ska jag sluta cirka, jag börjar med något annat. För det här, man kan säga så här då att enstaka företag kommer inte att kunna klara hållbarheten på eget. Det måste finnas system för samarbete, det måste finnas statlig styrning och samtidigt en öppen spelplan. Det kan mycket väl bli så att det kommer nya smarta affärsmodeller och aktörer som gör att alla som är inne i handelssektorn och det som ligger före och efter kommer att kunna agera bättre i det här landskapet vi har. Skulle du hålla med om det? Eller är jag för positiv nu?
Yeah, no, I mean, if you look at this from a very pessimistic way, you can look at maybe the tobacco industry as an example, right? When something is no longer seen as a good thing, you will see decline in that industry. But I guess retailers have an option here. They don't have to be part of this old guard. I think they can be very much part of being innovative and coming with solutions that really help consumers in a creative way to do the right thing. So anything that
med lönsamhet.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we'll see that growing. It's maybe challenging at the moment, but we will start to see more growth in this area. And we are starting to see some more growth in that area already. It's tricky, but they don't have to do everything themselves, right? There are creative, innovative organizations out there, and those kind of partnerships between existing retailers and these new innovators, I think, will be really promising.
Avslutningsvis, ditt drömforskningsprojekt, vad skulle det vara just nu?
I actually have an idea that I've been working on in the back of my head. We have these new EU textile passports, I think they're going to be called, with these small QR codes that are going to be in all new clothes for the start. But I think it will then be eventually in all products. I think they're called product passports, but they're coming in fairly soon, I think, and they're going to be a really interesting way for consumers to engage with the products they own and see how they can care for them, how they can prolong their life, and how eventually they can get them back into the circular economy in a correct way. So I would absolutely love to do research with those when they come out and see how do consumers understand them, what do they do with them, does it really make life easier for consumers, and does it help them to do the right thing? That I think would be really, really interesting.
Då håller vi utkik efter det. Och innan dess så kommer rapporten som ni håller på med nu då att publiceras i slutet på året, lovade du antagligen att den skulle komma på Handelsrådets hemsida. Tack för att du tog dig tid och komma hit till studion i Lund. Och till lyssnarna säger jag på återhörande, och vi har ju fler program i den här serien både på Spotify och på Handelsrådets YouTube-kanal. Vi hörs. Hej!